Ahead on America This Week, United We Stand.
What the president is more focused on is bringing the police and community together.
I talk with Deputy Assistant to the President, Jaron Smith. Plus, could an increase in calls for defunding the police lead to an increase in violence?
Police do not reduce violence. They never have. Unless there is some magic wand to be waved and they can tell when violence is going to happen and they're going to show up before it actually occurs, they are called when violence is happening.
Political commentator Ameshia Cross weighs in. And coronavirus cases on the rise. Is it because of testing or is it something more?
We're seeing a record rate of hospitalizations now in 7 states in the country. And then what follows is, unfortunately, the death toll rises.
Pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson is here to discuss that and so much more right now in America This Week, United We Stand. There are growing calls to dismantle and defund the police, but what are the president's plans to improve community and law enforcement relationships? Welcome to America This Week, United We Stand. I'm Eric Bolling. We have a lot to get to tonight, from national unrest to the latest coronavirus. Joining me now is Deputy Assistant to the President, Jaron Smith. Thank you very much. Jaron, thank you. As you see these cries, these calls to defund police departments across the country, and they're doing it, mayors like in Seattle are defunding, at least reducing funding to police. What does the administration think the outcome of this will be down the road?
Well, I think it's very risky to do that to the police departments because the police keep us safe. And if you've seen some of the violence that's happened in places like Chicago and New York and even recently in Seattle, that's definitely the wrong direction that we should go in. What the president is more focused on is bringing the police and community together. And through our executive order that we just signed a week ago, we're looking to build trust between the police and the communities. You know,
it's an important point. The executive order was signed, and then the Senate Republicans put together their version of a police reform bill, and it'll work its way through the halls of D.C. the way it does. But let's talk a little bit about that executive order. A lot of people are saying the chokehold should have been eliminated, should have been banned and barred across the country. There are cops that will tell you you can't eliminate the chokehold because that leaves you with 2 options, a taser or a gun, and those could both be lethal. What was the thought process behind leaving the chokehold in the executive order?
Well, see, this is all about police departments having the highest standards. If you review what happened in Minneapolis, they hadn't updated their standards in over 40 years. So they're not even following the high standards that many police departments have. And so in that standard, the chokehold is only allowed if the officer's life is on the line. And that makes perfect sense. If the officer is in a place where he can use deadly force, we want to allow for those police officers to be able to defend themselves. And so that's our view on it. And I think that's most police departments' view on it. And if we had higher standards in Minneapolis, we wouldn't have had the issue that we ran into. And so that's what our executive order is doing. It's encouraging the higher standard by conditioning our funding to those higher standards through accreditation and certification.
Does the administration, Jaron, believe that there is systemic racism amongst police departments in America?
I think the administration thinks that the system overall has been broken. That's why we've worked on opportunity zones. We've worked on restoring more funding to HBCUs, as well as reforming our criminal justice reform system through the First Step Act. I think working on community policing is just ensuring that we have better police and community relations and that we're recruiting people from the communities that are being policed. I think in the African-American community, it'd be great if we had more black boys and girls growing up to be police officers and policing the community they grew up in.
You know, a very important point, I've been talking about that for years, that the police department's demographics should mirror the community that they're policing. For example, in New York, it's about half. In other words, the black community is double the population versus if you were to apply it to the police department. That's a problem. But when police are being demonized the way they are right now, how are you going to get people to want to, you talk about young boys and girls, young African-American and minority boys and girls, to want to be cops when there's such a bad moniker put on cops. They're almost seen as the opposite of heroes, as villains. How are you going to get black kids to come out and be cops?
Well, it first starts with creating better relationships. I think if you start working with community leaders which our executive order does, and come up with out-of-the-box thinking programs like co-responder programs that allows a social worker to go on the scene with the police officer for mental health, drug addiction, as well as issues dealing with the homeless. You start having a different respect for those police departments. And we're not talking about something new. If you look at what happened in Camden, New Jersey, they reformed their police department, focused on having higher standards, focused on police and community relations, and what that led to was the police in the community doing peaceful protests together. But it also led to lower crime rates. You're looking at an area of the country that had some of the highest crime rates per capita. And so that's what the president's looking at. He's looking at law and order, but with compassion, a way to bring the communities together, but also keep them safe.
You know, you pointed out Chicago, 107, I believe, people shot in Chicago on Father's Day weekend. What's the answer?
That's exactly right. The answers, like I said, is you have to have more police officers on the beat. But if you go down this whole vein of demonizing police, you're going to encourage less people to be police officers. What we want to do is professionalize the actual positions of being the police, get them the proper training, help them deal with de-escalation, and more importantly, build that community and police relation by partnering with churches and nonprofits that are in those communities and getting to know the people. If you know the people in the community and you have that relationship, you can better navigate how to take in the law or when you need help with certain individuals. I think the focus for police is on those violent offenders, because we don't live in a world where people are perfect, and we definitely got evildoers, and we need our police to help protect us. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, we're starting a debate. It's a long-term debate, and it's always a good first step, as you point out, Jerron Smith, Deputy Assistant to the President. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Ahead on America This Week, United We Stand. There's a spike in violence in cities across the country. Why some worry this could be a rising trend. Next.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand, America. United we stand. We stand, America. United we stand. United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand, America. United we stand. We stand, America. United we stand.
Last weekend was deadly in the United States as dozens of shootings were reported in cities coast to coast. Sinclair national correspondent Christine Frizzell takes a look at why some are concerned this trend could last through the summer.
A violent weekend across the United States, including a shooting at an outdoor party in Syracuse, New York. One of 4 shootings in just 3 hours there. And more than 100 shot and 14 killed in Chicago, including a 3-year-old boy, according to the mayor, Lori Lightfoot. And in the Capitol Hill Organized Protest Zone, or CHOP, in Seattle, a 19-year-old was shot and killed. Another man now in critical condition. But police were barred from entering. Those inside cheered as they returned to their cars, though some outside are now expressing outrage. Acting Director of Customs and Border Protection Mark Morgan, a former police officer himself, fears police may now be holding back.
You're already seeing some departments out there concerned about going and being able to do their job, and are they going to be supported by their leadership, their local leadership?
Even though it's not part of any proposed legislation on Capitol Hill, there is concern that some of this increased talk of defunding and dismantling the police could be linked to some of the increases in violence we're seeing.
We are the party of law and order.
I am concerned about the type of crime that's going to continue in major cities throughout this country.
Others worry the progress made by recent protests in terms of discussions and proposals for police reform will be lost in the midst of these calls to defund police and recent violence.
Vice President Biden has come out and basically said that he doesn't believe in defunding the police, that he supports reform. What happened to George Floyd is horrific and it should never happen.
How to best respond is still up for debate. What many say is not up for debate is the need for a solution. Just one more example, Baltimore is on track to record its 6th straight year of more than 300 murders. One of this weekend's victims was also a 3-year-old. For America This Week, I'm Christine Frizzau.
Thank you, Christine. It seems like there's been a major increase in violence the past few weeks. Some are still calling to defund the police. Joining me now is political commentator Ameshia Cross. Now, Ameshia, you're actually the daughter of a Chicago police commander. Are you calling to defund the police?
I would call to defund the police by another name. I think that we're getting caught too much in the vocabulary around defund the police and not the theory behind it. And the theory behind the defund the police movement is that you reallocate the funds that are being used for a lot of policing, and reallocation by between 4 and 10% to services that we know reduce violence in communities: housing, unemployment, economic development, education, and mental health services. Those specific needs are things that we know when they are unmet, violence increases. And it doesn't matter which community you happen to be in, those are part and parcel to the formula of violence growing.
You know, Ameshia, I'm watching so many videos of, it looks just violence on the street. A lot of times it's African Americans, you know, beating on white people, and there are those on the right who are saying this is what you want to defund. I know that's not what you're trying to say, but the concern is among people, among citizens who are concerned, who are police loving, law enforcement loving people, that the streets will devolve into violent scenes left and right. How do you combat that when you say defund the police?
Well, I'm not talking episodic violence. I think that in this narrative of policing around what people are seeing with a lot of the protests and the post-protest movement, there's a lot of excitement and outrage over what we've seen with some of the looting and other things surrounding that. When I'm talking about defund the police, and what many people and organizers on the streets are talking about is not episodic violence, it's daily violence that's happening inside our communities. As you know, I'm a native Chicagoan. This violence is something that we grow up knowing is going to happen. We see it in our communities every day. It is not something that, you know, is episodic or something that happens every now and then. Those issues are solved by ensuring that those communities are fruitful, ensuring that those communities have the vitality and the resources necessary.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's do this. Let's take Chicago. Your father's a cop there. You grew up there. I grew up there. Last weekend, they had 107 shootings on Father's Day weekend. They had a young, I believe a 3-year-old was killed, if I'm not mistaken. Here's my question. What does defunding the police, how is that going to fix the problems of Chicago?
Chicago now is funded to nearly $3 billion for its police department. And the argument has been for decades. This is not something that just started with the protest movement. This argument has happened for decades, that with the divestment in the city, with the moving of money away from schools, with the moving of money away from hospitals and clinics, with the moving of money away from affordable housing, we saw steady increases in violence. There is a track that we can literally look at and see exactly what happened as the city continued to divert funds towards policing. It is the largest ballooned funding structure of the city of Chicago, yet it has not reduced any violence associated with the city of Chicago.
So wait, Ameshia, let me get this straight. But I'm not going to disagree with you when you take money away from education, when you take money away from community outreach, then violence can go up. But taking money from police in a crime-ridden city like Chicago, my hometown, again, I'm not sure how that helps anything. You're placing the blame on cops or something, or defund them. What are you saying? That this additional money that you take from cops, putting in education is going to solve the crime in some of these neighborhoods where every weekend 10, 20, or 30 people are being shot?
Well, we have to remember that it's not taking money away from cops, because cops' salaries didn't automatically go up with the institution of more money being funded to the police department. What ended up happening was we started funding tanks. We started funding military gear. We started funding riot gear. We started funding the type of gear that's necessary in Iraq, in Afghanistan. It was not used for the funding of the police officers themselves. It was used for the funding of a police state that is akin to the military.
You know, I honestly, Ameshia, I don't remember any tanks rolling down the streets of Chicago. My concern here. My concern here is that we're talking about defunding police. Seattle mayor, for example, with all the crap going on in Seattle right now, Seattle mayor dropped the police funding by 5%. That money is now taken away from police. Those people in Seattle have to be going, wait a minute, I'm watching all this violence happening on my streets. People are occupying my streets, and you're going to take money away from cops? I just don't know. Listen, I'm all for additional funding for community outreach, for education, for the other programs you mentioned, but not at the expense of police.
And my argument would be, Eric, that this isn't at the expense of police. Again, a lot of this funding has been used to fund a military state. It hasn't been used for community development or community policing at all. Actually, those are some of the lowest of policing budgets. So this reallocation of funding actually makes sense, because we know that in areas where these organizations are fully funded, where those social programs are fully funded, violence is automatically reduced. Police do not reduce violence. They never have. Unless there is some magic wand to be waved and they can tell when violence is going to happen and they're going to show up before it actually occurs, they are called when violence is happening. They are not people who intercept and prevent violence.
There is, Ameshia, there is that detriment. If you think you're going to get caught by a cop, you tend not to do the crime. You know, there is that. I disagree with you that police don't stop crime, because I can imagine how much lawlessness and crime there would be in a community without any police force. I think what we're getting down to, and we're seeing this over the last few weeks, defund the police was just a bad name. It just needs to be renamed, perhaps. Final thought?
No, I think that with all the pushback we've seen from it, there's a lot of confusion around it. Yes, I can say that defund the police probably wasn't the right language to use.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. By the way, thank your dad for me personally, will you, please?
Absolutely.
Ameshia Cross, everybody. Ahead on America This Week, coronavirus cases seem to be on the rise. Could the increase in testing be the blame for the high infection rate? I want to take a minute to update you on a project that's near and dear to me. As you may recall, I'm the chairman of a new company whose mission it is to find alternatives to opioids for pain. Jan 1 is the company, and we're making strides in the fight to save lives. Currently, we have a drug in clinical development which treats pain at the source and is a non-opioid. I can only hope to be on the team that develops an alternative to drugs like OxyContin and fentanyl. Those drugs are at the center of hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths in America. I personally have met with HHS Deputy Secretary Admiral Brett Giroir and also former FDA Administrator Dr. Scott Gottlieb about bringing this alternative drug to the market safely and without addictive properties. Now, full disclosure, Jan 1 is a NASDAQ-traded company under the symbol JAN, and the only financial consideration I have in the company is through the foundation in my son's name, the Eric Chase Foundation.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand American strong. United we stand. We stand American strong. City by city, state by state, town by town, stand American great. Everyone stands American strong. When strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand American strong. United we stand. We stand American strong. United we stand.
America This Week, America's fastest growing political show, points out how rough and tumble politics shape opinion in every region in our country. We tell American stories, stories that touch our people, determine our politics, focus on the future of America.
I'm Eric Bolling. Join me for a fascinating look at America This Week. This week, Florida hit 100,000 coronavirus cases, a grim milestone. Governor Ron DeSantis linked part of the rising cases to more testing. Joining now to discuss is pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson. Welcome back, Dr. Dena. So guess what? You and I had a little back and forth about what's going on. You said, you know, more testing, more cases. I said more cases, fewer deaths. Guess what? We were both right.
It's too early to tell, Eric. What we know is that the number of cases is a leading indicator. Now what we're seeing is, just as I said, we're going to see this rise in hospitalizations. We're seeing a record rate of hospitalizations now in 7 states in the country. And then what follows is, unfortunately, the death toll rises. It takes a few weeks for people to succumb to the virus. So it's really too early to tell. But when the pandemic first started in this country, we saw the same trend, was that in the months where states had record numbers of cases, then the following month, they also had these huge surges, unfortunately, in the death count. So I think that only time's going to tell. And I think, unfortunately and sadly, it's going to tell a very grim story.
Allow me to throw a theory out there. You know, anecdotally, I'm sitting around in a social setting, and it's some young people over there talking, college-age students. They're talking about the parties they were going to. They're staying out late at night, drinking with each other. And then they're talking about friends who had COVID, and they're, oh, shocker, that one got COVID. But they're not dying from this. So is this part of it where people are realizing that as you're a younger person, you may well get this, but it's not as big of a deal as it was 2 or 3 months ago? So they're not practicing the social distancing and things that we've told them to do, but yet the death rate continues to go down because it's the end. We're kind of coming to the end of a phase 1.
Well, Eric, I think that it is possible that the fact that we are seeing younger people, that are getting diagnosed, and they do have a lower risk, albeit it's not zero risk. And I do think that in part likely may account for slightly decreased death toll. But again, it's a little too early to tell. And what we've seen really globally is that what we first see is that the cases spread like wildfire in people ages sort of 20 to 40, people who are out and about, your bartenders, your baristas, your wait staff. And then it's the older folks that get it. And as we know, older folks are much more sensitive. So just because right now, perhaps a lot of the cases are in younger people, well, younger people have parents and grandparents and older loved ones. And sadly, they can spread the virus to those more vulnerable people. All
right, let's talk a little about the MAGA rallies that happened this week. We saw both Tulsa and then we saw Phoenix as well. And it's very close quarters. Are you expecting rises in coronavirus cases in those areas because of those?
Eric, unfortunately, yes. I mean, these were rallies indoors. I didn't see really any masks being worn. People jammed in, packed in, shoulder to shoulder. Really the perfect storm, if you will, for viral spread. And we certainly already know that some of Mr. Trump's own advanced team at the rally in Tulsa, I believe at least 8 of those folks have already tested positive for COVID-19. And we know that people are likely spreading the virus before they actually test positive for the virus. So I do expect those cases to spike. And Arizona in particular, which really is right now setting the trend, and a bad trend it is, for this huge surge, not only in new cases, but also in hospitalizations.
And you don't think, and because we're not seeing any sort of rise or spike in coronavirus cases in the areas that we're seeing mass protests in Minneapolis and some of the other cities, L.A., even here in D.C., you're not seeing that rise. Now, I know it's outside versus inside, but everything we've learned from Birx and Fauci is, this thing can have a 10 or 12-foot radius if someone coughs or sneezes. These people were packed in, protesting very, very close, and no masks.
Well, a lot of the protesters were wearing masks, Eric, but we do, we're learning something new about this virus all the time, as we've been discussing on the show for months, really. And being outside, just having the air circulating is a huge is a huge factor that we have to consider. And also, it's being in close proximity to someone who's infected for prolonged periods of time. So people are kind of moving around outside. So they may be next to somebody who has the virus, let's say for a couple of minutes, but then they move away. That risk then potentially is lower, especially with mask wearing.
All right, final question, Dr. Fauci was testifying during the week, and he said that there's most likely going to be a vaccine by the end of the year. Does that change your assessment that we will likely need another shutdown by the end of the year?
Unfortunately, Eric, it doesn't, because I think that we're already seeing this huge surge in cases now, and it's summer. Once the fall comes, that surge is only going to be exacerbated. And just because we have the data saying we have a safe vaccine, you don't just line up hundreds of millions of people and vaccinate them overnight. It will take months to get that accomplished. And I really hope it happens.
All right, Dr. Dena Grayson, we're going to say thank you very much for your time again. See you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Look, we'd hate for you to miss even a minute of America This Week or United We Stand. Remember to set your DVR so you don't miss a thing. Go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/America Bowling, all one word, and find out when we air in your city.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand, America. United we stand. We stand, America. United we stand. United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time. We stand, America. United we stand. We stand, America. United we stand.
Well, it's a wrap from the D.C. Swamp. Thank you for joining me for another episode of America This Week, United We Stand. Summer looks a little different this year due to the curveballs brought on by 2020. But as states open up slowly, we hope you can get back to some of your favorite summer activities safely. Tonight, we leave you with the images of Miami, where beachgoers are enjoying sun, surf, and sand while practicing social distancing. Good night, everybody.